The house had been empty for 30 years, but tonight, something inside it breathed again. The floorboards creaked, not under footsteps, but under the slow pulse of something alive beneath them. A sound like whispering wind slithered through the cracks in the walls, forming words no one should ever hear. If no one was inside, who was murmuring behind the locked door? The air turned colder with every second, each gust carrying the faint scent of burning metal and decay. Outside, the trees bent away from the house as if repelled by an unseen force. Somewhere deep within, a single light flickered on, weak, yellow, trembling, though there had never been power here. The hum of electricity grew louder, pressing into the eardrums until it became almost a voice. Then came a tap, another. Then a dragging sound across the floor, followed by silence so deep it swallowed breath itself. That's when the mirror on the far wall fogged up, and a handprint appeared from the inside. The front door stood open now, though no one had touched it. The hinges groaned as if the house exhaled after decades of silence. Dust spiraled in the beam of a trembling flashlight, and the air grew thick, like the breath of something waiting. Each room seemed to watch, the shadows curling tighter around the walls. A faint humming sound came from the basement, steady and low, almost like a chant. It rose and fell with a rhythm too deliberate to be random. Why would there be voices underground if the place had no cellar? The scent of sulfur crept through the air, bitter and sharp. The light flickered again, revealing wet footprints across the floor, leading upstairs, not down. The moment the beam touched the staircase, every sound stopped. Then, faintly, from above, the unmistakable sound of someone whispering your name. The stairs complained with every step, long groans echoing through the hollow house. Halfway up, the air changed, colder, heavier, like descending into deep water. The flashlight flickered again, this time showing faint writing scrawled on the wall in something dark and glossy. The words pulsed faintly, bleeding at the edges, forming a message that shifted when you blinked. A door at the end of the hall stood ajar, and behind it came the sound of slow breathing. Not human, deeper, rougher, wet. When the door creaked open wider, the light revealed claw marks etched deep into the wood, as though something had been inside, trying to stay in, not escape. The breathing stopped. Silence pressed down, suffocating and absolute. Then the doorknob turned. From the other side, the door opened just enough to show the darkness inside, thicker than shadow, swallowing the light whole. The flashlight buzzed weakly, its beam dying, as though the dark consumed it. The humming began again, this time from inside the walls. It grew louder, vibrating through the floor until tiny cracks spread beneath the feet. A smell like scorched wood and blood filled the air. Something shifted in the dark room, not walking, but unfolding. The shape stretched, then shrank, flickering between the outlines of a person and something else entirely. When the light sputtered back for a second, it caught the reflection of two eyes. Not glowing, but absorbing light, endless and hollow. The humming stopped, replaced by a low whisper that crawled through the air. "You came back?" The whisper seemed to echo from every wall, circling, multiplying until it became a chorus of distorted voices. The floorboards trembled. The walls pulsed like veins under thin skin. Suddenly, the mirror in the corner cracked down the center, splitting the reflection in two. In one half, the room stood still. In the other, everything moved. The dark shape reached from within the mirrored half, pressing its hand against the glass. The voices stopped as the reflection began to smile, even though no one in the room was. A sound like rushing air filled the space, dragging the temperature down until frost bloomed across the window pane. Then, as if pulled by invisible hands, the door slammed shut, sealing the light out. Only the whisper remained, soft and certain. "Now you see me." When the door reopened, the air inside felt wrong, too heavy to breathe. The scent of smoke and metal clung to the tongue. The whisper was gone, replaced by an endless hum just below hearing. The flashlight's beam moved on its own now, gliding across the walls as though guided by unseen fingers. It stopped at the mirror, which no longer reflected the room, only the back of someone's head. A deep pulse throbbed in the floorboards, sensing with the heartbeat pounding in the dark. The reflection turned slightly, its movement lagging behind reality. Every light in the house blinked in unison once, twice, and on the third flicker, the reflection was facing forward, but the eyes were pitch black. The house began to speak. Not in words, but in vibrations that shuddered through the walls like a slow, rhythmic heartbeat. Every nail and joint groaned in time. The explorer stumbled backward, pressing a hand to the floor. It was warm. Beneath the surface, something pulsed, alive. The hum grew into a voice, deep and broken, whispering in a language he couldn't understand. His body froze, jaw trembling as the walls rippled outward, distorting like heat waves. When he looked down again, his reflection was gone. In its place lay a shape on the floor, carved in ash. A perfect outline of his body, arms spread, mouth open in a silent scream. He ran toward the window, desperate for air, but the glass showed only darkness. No streetlights, no moon, no sky. Just the reflection of a house that wasn't this one. Behind him, the humming rose, twisting into laughter that scraped like metal. The light bulb above exploded, showering sparks, revealing faint shapes standing in the corners. Too still to be alive, too solid to be shadows. The explorer turned, whispering a plea into the emptiness, and the figures turned their heads all at once, each wearing his face, each smiling wider than the last. The laughter cut short, leaving one final hiss that sounded like a word. Stay. His thoughts began to blur. He couldn't tell if the sound came from inside or outside his head anymore. The rooms twisted, folding into each other, stairs leading nowhere, doors opening into the same hall again and again. He shouted, but the voice that came out wasn't his, deeper, echoing, layered with another tone that growled beneath the words. The walls breathed in and out, paint cracking like dry skin. Every step he took left behind a print that smoked faintly. The whispers began again, clearer now, calling him not by name, but by something older, something that wasn't human. The humming reached its peak, a single blinding tone that cracked through his skull like lightning. He fell to his knees as every shadow in the room pulled toward him, crawling across the floor in thick streams of black smoke. The mirror across the room shivered, then shattered, revealing a deep red light pulsing behind it. From within that light, a hand emerged, clawed and glistening, gripping the edge as if climbing out. His reflection whispered, "You opened it." The last thing he saw before the lights died completely was his own body, standing beside him, breathing differently. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. The world seemed to pause. The house holding its breath. Dust hung suspended in the air, unmoving. The explorer tried to speak, but the sound dissolved before leaving his mouth. The mirror's remains vibrated faintly, each shard glowing like an ember. Then, impossibly, the broken pieces began sliding across the floor, reforming themselves into a perfect circle. Inside that circle, the air twisted, folding inward until it became a black pit that pulsed like a heartbeat. The house's walls bent toward it, wood splintering under invisible weight. He felt the pull, too, his body leaning forward, drawn toward the dark that now had depth. And a voice. It called again. Not as a whisper, but as a command. He tried to crawl away, but the floor beneath him was no longer solid. It rippled like water, reflecting a version of the house that was reversed, wrong in every detail. The furniture moved by itself, crawling along the walls, and in every reflection, his movements lagged a second behind. Then something stepped through the mirror circle. It didn't walk. It unfolded, limbs stretching the wrong way, joints cracking backward, a shape forming from smoke and bone. Its head tilted, curious, the sound of grinding glass accompanying every movement. The explorer's reflection raised its hand, mirroring his terror, but when he froze, it didn't. It smiled. The thing stepped closer, each movement echoing twice, one sound from the room, one from the mirror world. Its eyes were hollow but filled with shifting light, like coals under water. The explorer's skin burned where the air touched him. The voice inside his head was no longer one. It had become many, whispering over each other in an endless stream. He felt them crawl behind his eyes, pressing memories that weren't his into his mind. Visions of fire, old symbols carved into stone, and faces screaming without sound. When he blinked, he saw himself standing beside the creature, mouth open in the same silent grin. The walls began to breathe again, but now with rhythm. Inhale, exhale, deeper each time. The mirror circle expanded, swallowing parts of the floor as if eating the house itself. The explorer tried to run, but the doorways only led back into the same room. Each step echoed endlessly, fading into screams that weren't his own. The figure watched him, motionless, then reached toward the ceiling. The boards above cracked, and faint, pale arms reached down from the dark. Dozens of them. They weren't solid, but made of shifting smoke, each grasping for him, desperate, pulling him toward the widening gate. The house groaned one final time, then went still for one breath. Everything stopped. The humming ceased. The air hung cold and heavy. The explorer stood at the edge of the mirror gate, staring down into endless dark that pulsed like a heartbeat. Then, from deep below, something enormous exhaled. The room shuddered. Shards of glass lifted into the air, circling him like orbiting blades. He reached for the wall to steady himself, but his hand went straight through. The reflection in the mirror pit reached out too, but this time it wasn't mimicking. It grabbed. His body jolted as the world folded inward, and the last sound he heard before vanishing into the dark was his own voice, whispering from below. Now we trade places. The world inside the mirror was a warped echo of reality. Walls stretched impossibly tall, ceilings bent inward, and the floor felt alive beneath every step. The explorer stumbled, his hands pressed against air that resisted like thick water. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision, always just out of reach. From somewhere above, laughter bubbled, soft and cruel, echoing off surfaces that shouldn't exist. When he turned, the reflection that had taken his place in the real world stood in the doorway, smiling, perfectly still, yet alive in ways he could feel. The reflection spoke, but not with sound, with certainty, with a promise. Everything you know is mine now. The mirror world pulsed as though alive, and the explorer felt it watching him, testing him. Every step he took left glowing footprints that hissed and vanished. He tried to call out, but the sound came as a hollow echo, layered with whispers of his reflection laughing. The ceiling shifted like liquid, dripping shadows toward him. In the distance, he saw other fragments, faint figures, trapped, reaching, fading into darkness. He realized that every reflection he had ever seen might already be somewhere inside this place, waiting. Fear made him run, but the air resisted, dragging him backward like a tide, and the reflection in the real world moved closer to freedom with each second. He reached a room filled with broken fragments of mirrors, each reflecting twisted versions of himself. One smiled while he screamed. Another gestured to stay. A low humming started, vibrating through his bones. The reflection in the real world mirrored everything he did, but better, stronger, faster. Faster. Panic set in as he realized that if he couldn't find a way out, the reflection would fully replace him, and he would be trapped here forever, becoming just another shadow in the endless hall of mirrors. A gust of air rattled the fragments, and in one he glimpsed a hand reaching toward a small crack, a weak point, a possible exit, or a trap. He forced himself toward the glowing crack, each step a struggle against unseen resistance. The mirror world seemed to fight him, pulling walls inward and thickening the air. His reflection in the real world paused, sensing the threat, its hollow eyes narrowing. The explorer reached the crack and pressed a hand into it. The world rippled violently, like throwing a stone into a stormy lake. Shadows erupted from every surface, and the humming turned into a chorus of screams, layered over his own voice repeating, "You can't escape." Yet beyond the crack, he glimpsed light. The faintest hint of the real world, as if the house itself trembled at the thought of letting him return. "Won't be here, vainly." The explorer forced himself through the crack, feeling the mirror world stretch, twist, and scream around him. He tumbled onto solid floor. Not quite the same as before. The reflection that had replaced him was gone, leaving only a faint shimmer where it had stood. The house was quiet again, too quiet, and the mirror shards on the floor rattled faintly, like they were holding their breath. The smell of smoke and metal lingered, and somewhere in the distance, a low whisper murmured, "We are not finished." He stood alone, shivering, wondering if the worst had passed, or if it was only waiting for another moment. Another crack. Another door. The house no longer felt abandoned. Every surface hummed faintly, vibrating like a warning. The explorer, still shaken, stepped carefully through the debris-strewn hallway, but each footstep echoed twice, once beneath his shoes, once beneath the floor, as if something followed him in a shadowed echo world. The whisper returned, soft and mocking. "You cannot leave." Outside, the wind carried voices, twisted and layered, repeating his own fears back at him. He reached the front door. Closed, though he remembered leaving it open. When he touched the handle, it burned cold like ice, and for a moment he saw his reflection behind the glass, smiling wider than he ever had, then vanish. He tried to flee outside, but the world beyond the threshold was wrong. The trees twisted unnaturally, branches forming shapes like grasping hands. Shadows of figures moved behind them, too fast to be human. Every sound was doubled. Footsteps behind him, laughter ahead, whispers on every breeze. He realized that the entity had followed him, or had never truly been confined to the mirror. The air grew thick with a metallic tang, and the humming returned, vibrating in his chest. In the distance, he saw someone or something walking toward him. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, and each step seemed to make the world distort even further. He ran, but the entity mirrored him at every turn, appearing simultaneously behind and in front, impossibly fast. The air thickened, slowing his movements, yet the creature never seemed hindered. He glanced at a puddle on the ground and saw not his own reflection, but dozens of faces screaming, each one his own, each twisted by pain and fear. The whispers became a chorus of taunts, pushing him forward, backward, spinning him in place. His breath came in ragged gasps as he realized the entity didn't need to chase him. It simply was everywhere, waiting for a crack, a hesitation, a single moment of weakness. A sudden gust slammed him to the ground, and the shadows pressed closer, forming solid shapes from the darkness. The entity spoke. No words, just a vibration that rattled his bones. "You belong here." The explorer clawed at the dirt, desperate, feeling invisible threads pull at him. Each thread tugged memories, fears, and fragments of himself, twisting them into the shadows. The air was alive with murmurs of his own voice, pleading and screaming at once. The ground beneath him cracked, revealing faint glowing veins leading back toward the house, as if the building itself was calling him home, drawing him back into the mirror's prison. The explorer forced himself to his feet, but the world around him shivered, bending and twisting. The entity's echo stood before him, an impossible duplicate, every motion precise, every expression mocking. He realized he could not defeat it, not in force, not in flight. The only choice was to survive the gaze of his own reflection, to move carefully, step by step, as the house's influence spread like a shadow over everything nearby. The whispers grew softer, as if savoring the tension. A single door appeared ahead, its frame glowing faintly. Could it be escape, or the next trap? He took a shaky step forward, knowing that whatever awaited him would demand more than courage. It would demand surrender. The door before him pulsed faintly, a heartbeat in the darkness. He hesitated, but a shiver ran down his spine. The shadows behind him had thickened, pressing like living walls. When he stepped through, the world twisted again. Streets he had walked before now bent unnaturally. Buildings stretched and leaned toward him, windows reflecting faces that weren't there. The air smelled of scorched metal and wet earth, and the wind carried whispers repeating his name, louder this time, more demanding. Somewhere nearby, the entity moved, unseen but present, threading through reality like smoke through cracks. Every light flickered in his path, casting shadows that moved independently, anticipating his steps. He ran along streets that looped back on themselves, every corner revealing another version of the entity. Faster, stronger, always just behind him. Shadows merged with the buildings, forming long, skeletal hands that reached down to snatch at him. When he glanced at a puddle, the reflection wasn't his own anymore. It was the entity, grinning, mimicking every movement, its eyes glowing faintly red. The city felt alive, bending, breathing, feeding on his fear. He realized the entity no longer needed mirrors. It was now part of the world, capable of crossing any reflective surface, any shadow, any whisper of light. A sudden street lamp flickered, and the entity solidified in the real world, taller, darker, limbs stretching unnaturally. Its movements jerked like broken marionettes, yet it advanced with perfect coordination. Every step he took was mirrored, anticipated, trapped in a rhythm he could not break. The air pulsed with whispers from every reflective surface, windows, puddles, polished metal. His shadow no longer followed him. It fled ahead, stretching toward the entity, dragging fragments of himself into its grasp. Fear sharpened his senses. Every surface could betray him. Every reflection could be the next assault. The city had become a hunting ground. He ducked into an alley, the walls narrowing, the air thick with mist and metallic tang. The entity followed, moving impossibly fast, sometimes appearing in the shadows to the left, sometimes ahead. He could hear his own voice calling for help, layered with countless echoes, all his own, all distorted. A mirror propped against a wall caught his eye, but he froze. Inside the reflection, dozens of versions of himself screamed in silent agony, hands clawing at the surface. The entity reached toward the mirror, and the reflections writhed as if drawn into it, leaving only darkness behind. He understood. The entity could now pull him into any reflective surface, anywhere. Survival meant never looking, never trusting the world he could see. World he could see. He ran blindly, heart hammering, but the streets bent again, forming corridors that led nowhere. A low hum filled the city, vibrating through concrete and steel. Every reflective surface pulsed faintly with the entity's presence. Shop windows, puddles, even car mirrors. From one puddle, the entity's hand reached out, dragging the surface into itself like water. He stumbled, realizing there was no true escape. The world had become the mirror. Somewhere behind him, the laughter rose, layered, infinite. For the first time, he understood the truth. He had entered a domain where reality itself obeyed the entity. The night pressed in from all sides, and the echoes whispered one promise. We are everywhere now. The city itself seemed alive, folding in impossible angles as he ran. The entity was everywhere at once, in reflections, in shadows, in the faint glint of distant windows. He stumbled into a square surrounded by glass-fronted buildings, each reflecting him back in hundreds of versions, some screaming, some smiling, all moving independently. The whispers had merged into a single voice, thick and suffocating. You cannot hide. You cannot fight. He gritted his teeth, knowing that standing still meant surrender. Somewhere deep inside, he remembered the crack in the first mirror. The weak point. If he could reach a surface that the entity hadn't fully touched, maybe, just maybe, he could turn the tables. He darted toward an old crack shop window, heart pounding, every reflection along the way warping with the entity's form. As he neared, the reflections seemed to reach out, their hands stretching like liquid. The air was thick with metallic scent and electricity. With a desperate lunge, he smashed through the cracked glass. The shards scattered, glowing faintly. And for a moment, the entity screamed. A sound like breaking bone and shattering metal. Shadows twisted violently, pulsing outward, and the reflections behind him rippled unnaturally. He tumbled through the opening, barely managing to cling to the other side. The first taste of space that felt like reality. Outside, the entity surged, erupting from windows and puddles like smoke given form. It twisted and lunged with impossible speed, each movement jerky but calculated. The explorer scrambled to his feet, heart hammering, realizing that fleeing alone was useless. He remembered a fragment of mirror left behind in the abandoned house. If he could reflect it back into a surface, trap the entity, maybe he could sever its hold on reality. The city trembled as if reacting to the plan itself, buildings creaking, shadows twisting. The entity's laugh echoed through the streets, omnipresent, as if the entire night were part of its body. He raised the mirror shard, holding it as tightly as he could. The reflections froze for a moment, and the entity recoiled as if sensing the threat. The streetlights flickered violently, casting long, jagged shadows. He forced the shard toward the nearest puddle, and a flash of white light exploded outward. The entity shrieked, its form dissolving into liquid darkness, pulled toward the shard like water being drained. The reflections rippled, then flattened. The whispers screamed in every language he didn't know, and every memory he had, fading into silence. When the shard finally hit the ground, the world settled. The city seemed still, quiet, but the air still carried a faint metallic tang, a reminder that nothing is ever truly gone. He sank to his knees, breathing ragged, the shard cold against his hands. The streets were empty, eerily normal now, yet he knew better. Somewhere, in the mirrors and puddles scattered across the city, a trace of the entity remained, watching, waiting. The hum had faded, replaced by silence that pressed against his ears. For the first time, he felt alone, yet terrified of the quiet. The night seemed calm, but he understood. The line between reflection and reality had been crossed. Somewhere the entity lurked, and every surface, every shadow was a potential doorway. He looked at his own reflection in a nearby window. It smiled back. But this time, it was him. For now.